Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Reverend Steve Andrews. Today we continue with Judges chapter 14. Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and told his father and mother, "I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." But his father and mother said to him, "Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all our people that you must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes." His father and mother did not know that it was from Yahweh, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. Then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came toward him roaring. And then the Spirit of Yahweh rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces, as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. After some days he returned to take her. And he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion, and honey. He scraped it out into his hands, and went on, eating as he went. And he came to his father and mother, and gave some to them, and they ate. But he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey from the carcass of the lion. His father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, for so the young men used to do. As soon as the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said to them, "Let me now put a riddle to you. If you can tell me what it is within the 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell me what it is, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes." And they said to him, "Put your riddle, that we may hear it." And he said to them, "Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet." And in 3 days they could not solve the riddle. On the 4th day they said to Samson's wife, "Entice your husband to tell us what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us?" And Samson's wife wept over him and said, "You only hate me. You do not love me. You have put a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is." And he said to her, "Behold, I have not told my father nor my mother, and shall I tell you?" She wept before him the 7 days that their feast lasted, and on the 7th day he told her, because she pressed him hard. And then she told the riddle to her people, and the men of the city said to him on the 7th day, before the sun went down, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" And he said to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle." And the Spirit of Yahweh rushed upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, and struck down 30 men of the town, and took their spoil, and gave the garments to those who had told the riddle. In hot anger he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. This is the word of the Lord. So yesterday we got to see Samson conceived, the promise of the angel of the Lord, the angel of Yahweh, Jesus, to Samson's parents, Manoah and his mother. We got to see Manoah's wife, Samson's mom, had quite a strong faith. Manoah himself, the father, not as much. But today, as we see the text, not a good start for Samson. Remember that he is to be a Nazirite from birth. So that's a particular kind of vow that is taken, dedicating oneself to the Lord. Usually it's for a specific period of time, but in Samson's case, this vow is lifelong, as his mother recognizes from Jesus' words to her. We ended with verse 25 yesterday, that the Spirit of Yahweh began to stir him up in Mahanadan, which is the camp of Dan. So they never really settled into their inheritance, which was to be on the western side of Israel, near the Mediterranean Sea, but they're living near it anyway, at least at this time. Part of them are, and that's where you're going to have Samson grow up. Now, 14, today's chapter, verse 1, he goes down to Timnah, which is just a few miles to the south of where he was, and it's in Philistine territory. Notice how close Philistia, the Philistines, and the Israelites live to one another, as Philistia oppresses Israel. And so Samson goes down among them to find a wife for himself. Now, this is a breaking of God's command in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 3 and 4, where the Lord forbid intermarriage with other nations, because specifically the Lord knew that those mixed unions would bring about other faith in the land of Israel. If you married a person from Philistia, you'd end up worshiping the gods of the Philistines. If you married a person from one of the Canaanite tribes, you'd end up worshiping their gods. And we've already seen that in the book numerous times, right? The idea of the Israelites abandoning Yahweh and worshiping the Baals and the Ashtoreth. So here we have it again, Samson breaking this idea that the Lord has commanded not to marry outside. He demands from his parents that they go and get this woman for him to be his wife. His parents actually have the proper response in verse 3. They point to their own clan, so a close relative of some sort, or at the very least, someone in Israel among our people, that you must go and take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines. That uncircumcised word there, probably derogatory in usage. In its essence, though, what the word is getting at is the truth that the Philistines are not God's people. If you want to be part of the Old Testament covenant, if you want to be one of God's people, circumcision was the requirement. So to be uncircumcised meant you were not God's people. And just as Jew and Gentile becomes that divide in the New Testament era, and the Jews look down upon the Gentiles in many ways, you can see something like that, making this a derogatory sort of a word. They aren't God's people. Why would you want to marry one? And Samson's response is important. I'm going to note, it appears he only says this to dad, so he narrows in his focus, not just to his parents, but now specifically to his father. That could be connected to mom appearing more faithful in yesterday's chapter again, when Samson was just promised to them. Now he's grown up. So who knows what 20 years has done, or so. Anyway, get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. That is such a key phrase. In the overall context here of the book of Judges, the very last verse of the book, chapter 21, verse 25, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Yahweh is supposed to be king in Israel, and the people have already begun to reject him from that role, and instead of looking at things through the Lord's eyes, through the ways of his commandments, they do things however they want. And that's what we see here from Samson. However, verse 4, God is going to work even through Samson's sin. So his parents don't know that ultimately this is from the Lord. Yahweh is going to work through this sinful desire of Samson for this woman. I mean, do we want to call it lust? We probably can. But the Lord is going to do this to bring about judgment on the people of Philistia. And we're going to see that begin at the end of the chapter today. Because at that time, the Philistines are ruling over Israel. They're oppressing them as part of the cycle of the book of Judges, that final cycle that started in 1088 BC. So Samson goes with his parents down to Timnah to meet this woman, and they come to the vineyards. And as they do, apparently they don't go together, or at the very least, at a moment they have separated from one another. His parents and Samson not together, because a young lion rushes towards Samson, and Samson kills it, barehanded, right? The Spirit of Yahweh rushed upon him. Not the only time we're going to see that phrase about Samson. In fact, really, it's most common in this book of Judges than it is anywhere else in Scripture. Judges chapter 3, verse 10, it was spoken about the judge. Judges 6:34 about Gideon. Judges 11:29 about Jephthah. And then it'll be said about Samson here 4 times. Once yesterday, chapter 13, verse 25. Twice today in verse 6 and 19. And then tomorrow as well in verse 14 of chapter 15. The Spirit of Yahweh rushes upon him. So this is a unique gift, right? This is a unique moment where Samson is strengthened, bolstered. Men are not able to defeat lions in hand-to-hand combat, right? With no weapon at all. But the Spirit of the Yahweh being with him, strengthening him, God can do such things. And so God works through Samson to kill the beast. That is a defense of Samson in one way, but it also continues to set up this conflict that is coming. Because in the next verse, then, we skipped over, he did not tell his parents what he had done. He goes down, he talks to the woman. She, again, is right in Samson's eyes. It's a key point. After some days, he returns to take her to be his wife. And he sees the carcass of the lion. He turns aside to see it. He goes out of his way intentionally to see this lion, which is breaking his vow. The vow of the Nazirite he's supposed to have had from birth. He's breaking it. The Nazirite is not to touch anything dead. I mean, even his own family. Numbers chapter 6, verse 6, you can see that idea. And instead, he not only goes to see the lion, but when he recognizes that bees have taken up living inside this lion's hide and they've made honey, he gets down, he scrapes out that honey, and he eats some. So he's touched the dead body of the lion. He's touched something that was growing in the midst of that dead body. That honey is unclean. Not because honey is unclean, generally speaking, but because it's been growing inside of this carcass. And that's not just unclean in our perspective today, like that would be gross. It's unclean. Old Testament unclean. That is, it makes you unclean. You cannot participate in the things of God. You can't come to the temple, which tabernacle at this point still, and such things. You can't offer the offerings. You're unclean until the evening. That sort of an uncleanness. And he is unclean now, and he goes to his parents, and he makes them unclean without telling them, which I don't recall that specifically being stated, but that's a big deal. People avoided unclean people because they didn't want to be unclean. They wanted to be able to participate fully in their community and in the things of the Lord. And so here he goes to them. He does not tell them. He deceives. And he gives them this honey to eat. So they have become unclean with him that day. Samson, again, not off to a good start. He is not telling his parents things. He's withholding information from them. He is doing things the Lord has instructed him not to do, his people not to do. But they continue on. The wedding feast is prepared. So the young men used to do. The practice in the ancient culture was that they would have a week-long marriage celebration, a feast that would last for 7 days. And at the end of the 7 days, the man and his wife would then be that new family, that new household together. And that's what we're seeing here taking place. Now, you might ask your children, have you ever been to a wedding? Or what do you remember about the wedding we went to last summer? Or just get them talking about weddings today and compare them. To understand the ancient culture's idea of marriage and weddings specifically, is relevant as you study God's Word, especially when you get to Jesus and the Gospels, because you've got the first miracle, the wedding at Cana. It connects, right? They ran out of wine, not because they were having a 3-hour celebration together, but because they were having a week-long celebration together and they did not plan well enough. And then you also get some of the parables that Jesus tells as well. So knowing that background of ancient weddings is helpful for us today, even as Christians. Now, he puts before the Philistines a riddle, because the Philistines bring 30 men to him to be his companions during this wedding feast, likely men of similar age, to celebrate alongside of him this marriage. And he gives them a riddle, and they accept his challenge, right? They're basically betting on 30 pieces of clothing, 30 pieces of linen. And here's his riddle. They have a whole week to answer, right? The entire time of the feast. They can answer whenever they want. I'm assuming they can guess as much as they want to, but that's not specifically noted. Verse 14. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. 3 days of the feast go by. They can't figure out his riddle. So they finally ask his wife. They ask this woman of Timnah, who's never named here, to convince her husband to tell them the answer to the riddle. Or they threaten her to burn her and to burn her family's home as well, accusing her of inviting them there to make them poor. So, harsh words. These are not a good people, right? Instead of siding with her new groom, the husband of whose family she's becoming a part of, this young lady accuses him of hating her. And note what she says: "You have put a riddle to my people." As she is marrying Samson, Samson is now her people. But she's not recognizing this within the wedding. She's not recognizing this new reality for her. She is instead clinging to that past, right? For this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife. The two shall become one flesh. You have not told me what it is. So, because you haven't told me, you must hate me. That's her logic here. Samson responds, "I have not told my father nor my mother. Shall I tell you?" And this is one to stop and talk to the kids about as well. Which relationship comes first? How do we order our relationships as people in this creation? I have recently been hearing a lot about a hand motion that you can do. So if you put your hand, hold your hand out in front of you, I guess with your 4 fingers pointing to the left and your thumb pointing up, right? So your palm is facing you on your right hand. The thumb facing up is God. That is our primary relationship. All other things flow from him. He can touch all of our relationships. So you think how your thumb can touch each of your fingers. He is impacting all of those things. The first finger then, closest to your thumb, that is your highest priority among your earthly relationships, would be your spouse. That is the first and only real relationship the Lord himself has ordained. Although technically children flow from that naturally, right? So your relationship with your spouse is of the most important. There is not a higher importance among human relationships with one another. After that, your middle finger would be your children and extended family, so parents, siblings, and so forth. Your ring finger on that hand would be the church family, and then your pinky finger would be all of your other neighbors in this world. So that's a helpful way to organize and help you remember your priorities in relationships. And he's off here. He's keeping his secondary priority of parents as more so than his first. And again, that Genesis quote from Genesis 2:24, "For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. The two will become one flesh." He's becoming one flesh with her. She is supposed to be of more value to him now than his parents. And he is not showing that. Although, I guess in a sense he is. He's treating her just the same as he treats them. He's been withholding stuff from them. He withholds stuff from her. So she continues to weep before him for 7 days, the fullness of that feast, and at the end he finally breaks down. He tells her the answer to the riddle. She tells the men of the city. They're able to salve it. I put that in air quotes there because they didn't do anything other than press her. Samson's response to them is not flattering of his wife. "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle." So he accuses them, right, of working, conspiring with his bride. Potentially worse than that. Potentially, the accusation here could mean, as many commentaries suggest, that they have actually had sexual relationships with her. There's not enough in the phrase itself to know that for sure, but it is a possibility within the grammar of the text. And so then, again, we mentioned this before, Spirit of Yahweh rushed upon him. God is working through all of this. God's judgment begins against the Philistines through this foolish conflict between one Israelite and 30 Philistines, between a husband and wife not getting along as they should. And so Samson, instead of going and buying the clothing, he goes down to a Philistine city and he kills 30 men there and he brings the garments back and gives them to these guys to fulfill his side of this bet. Ashkelon is a major Philistine city, one of their chief 5 cities. It's about 23 miles away from where they are at this point. And then in hot anger, he just leaves. He doesn't even take the woman with him, right? Samson's wife is given to his companion, who had been his best man. That would be one of the 30. His companion. Remember, the companion's given to him earlier in the text. This is not one of his own people. The last note is just to point out about that. This woman has been celebrating a marriage feast for a week, and at the end of the week, it would be a complete shame and embarrassment to her to walk away without a husband and go back to her father's home. So instead, one of these Philistines decides to take her as his wife. The celebration's already been had, they've already had the party, and now these two become one flesh.